The crystal chandeliers hanging above the Mayfair ballroom did more than light the room. They seemed to reveal every hidden flaw in the people gathered beneath them, casting sharp, unforgiving shadows across the polished mahogany floor. Julian stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of mineral water as he watched Elena move effortlessly through the room. As always, she was the center of attention. People gravitated toward her like planets orbiting a star, drawn in by her charm and social influence. Julian had never minded her natural magnetism. In fact, he had once admired it, seeing it as proof of her confidence and strength. What troubled him was the subtle and practiced way she used that influence as a weapon, constantly testing how much disrespect he would tolerate before reaching his breaking point. Tonight, the source of that familiar tension was Marcus Vane. Marcus was a man whose arrogance rivaled his immense wealth and whose lack of boundaries was legendary. He stood far too close to Elena, his hand resting on her waist with a sense of ownership as he whispered something into her ear. She responded with a bright, polished laugh, the kind Julian knew was reserved for public appearances rather than genuine amusement. Eventually, Julian approached them, not out of jealousy, not to make a claim, simply to suggest they head toward the grand dining hall where dinner seating had already begun. Elena didn't greet him with warmth. She barely acknowledged him at all. "Don't be so provincial, Julian," she said, speaking just loudly enough for the nearby circle of socialites to hear every word. "Marcus is only being charming. If you were more secure in your place in this world, you wouldn't feel the need to interrupt a conversation that's clearly above your pay grade." The laughter that followed was controlled and polite, but to Julian it felt like a blade sliding between his ribs. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the cold, unmistakable clarity of a man finally spotting the exit sign in a burning building. For 6 months he had been the stable one, the grounding force in the life of a woman addicted to attention, admiration, and the endless thrill of social validation. Time and again, Elena and her friends had insisted that his boundaries were insecurities. They had framed his desire for basic respect as evidence of a narrow mind and fragile confidence. But standing beneath the bright lights of London's elite, Julian finally understood the truth. Elena wasn't testing his confidence. She was testing his willingness to endure public humiliation. And he had reached his limit. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't create the dramatic scene everyone expected. Instead, he gently placed his glass onto a passing waiter's silver tray. The soft clink seemed louder than the music surrounding them. "You're right, Elena," he said. His voice was calm and steady, yet somehow carried across the ballroom. "I am uncomfortable, but it isn't because of Marcus or anyone else in this room. I'm uncomfortable because I'm standing beside someone who believes my dignity is something that can be negotiated. I won't be staying for dinner, and I won't be staying for what comes afterward." Then he turned and walked away. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a deep thud that sounded like a judge's gavel delivering a long overdue verdict. He didn't wait for the valet. He didn't stop for his coat. Instead, he stepped into the cool evening air along Park Lane and immediately felt lighter than he had in months. The city seemed different now, more honest, less theatrical. His phone began vibrating almost instantly. He expected angry messages from Elena or demands for an apology. Instead, the first text came from his brother, who had witnessed everything from across the room. "Finally." That was all it said. Then more messages arrived. One came from Beatrice, an older social matriarch who rarely acknowledged anyone lacking an aristocratic title. "Well played, Julian," she wrote. "Self-respect is the one luxury most people in that room can't truly afford." Another arrived from a young entrepreneur he had spoken with earlier in the evening. "I wish I had the courage to do what you just did. She's treated partners like accessories for years. It's about time someone walked away. 2 days later, Elena appeared unannounced at his apartment. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't smiling either. She looked genuinely confused, as though a piece of expensive furniture had somehow moved itself to another room without permission. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," she began, though the sharpness usually present in her voice was noticeably absent. "You left me sitting there alone, explaining your absence to people who matter." Julian opened the door wider and allowed her inside, but he offered neither a drink nor a seat. He had no desire to extend the conversation beyond necessity. "I didn't leave you alone, Elena," he replied calmly. "I left you surrounded by exactly the kind of people you value most. I left you with people who care more about the appearance of a relationship than the person standing inside it." For a moment she simply stared at him. Then, perhaps for the first time since they had met, she truly looked at him. "It was only a party, Julian," she said. "That's just how things work in our world. You're taking it too personally." Julian slowly shook his head. For the first time, he felt something close to pity. "That's how things work in your world, Elena. In mine, loyalty isn't a performance, and respect isn't a burden. I'm not angry about who you are anymore. I'm disappointed in myself for pretending so long that I could become someone willing to accept this." The silence that followed carried the weight of something permanent. Elena finally understood there was nothing left to negotiate, no argument to win, no emotional lever to pull. Julian was no longer participating in the game she had spent years perfecting. When she finally left, she didn't slam the door. She closed it gently. Even she seemed to recognize that the ending was final. Julian sat beside the window for a long time afterward, watching the city lights flicker against the evening sky. He realized that high-status environments often disguise casual cruelty behind the language of confidence and sophistication. Healthy boundaries are frequently labeled as weaknesses because compliant people are easier to control. But the moment you stop fearing the loss of status, approval, or acceptance, something remarkable happens. You become free. Julian hadn't lost a socialite. He had found solid ground beneath his feet, and once you know where your foundation is, nobody can make you feel as though you're falling again. He understood now that walking away wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't an admission that his critics had been right. It was the greatest victory of all, the victory of a man who no longer needed the world to tell him he was enough, because he already knew